All right, so what are we going to be talking about today? So there are a few things that I want to cover today. The one is some of the important changes and things you want to notice about this challenge specifically for Onyx data. And then we're going to go and talk about a little bit the data set itself, how it looks like, what it consists of, and so forth, and what type of visuals could you be using with this actual data set, what kind of transformations you could have done, and these sort of things. Again, if you have any questions, drop them down. I'll be more than happy to answer them. And of course, afterwards, we have a specially separated segment for Q&A. That's specifically meant for those cases when we have a lot of questions. If we have just a few of them, I'm going to try to answer them on the fly whenever I have the time in between different topics. So, but yeah, as far as the important information goes, now there is one change that we did for, let me just change the screen for you now. There we go. This one we can hide. There we go. So one of the criteria that we changed is you need to have at least one page within the report that contains a minimum of 2 ZoomCharts visuals. Now, the reason why we did this is because what we're trying to do with these reports and whilst building the reports is we want you to start to investigate and explore more into the way of actual interactive drill down reports. That means the cross-chart filtering and these sort of things are applicable to all of the visuals. And what better way to showcase our visuals than to showcase it through cross-chart filtering, right? That's one of the core concepts of any decent working Power BI report. So this is just something to keep in mind, that previously you just had to use 2 visuals and you could separate them into different pages. Starting from this challenge, you need to have at least 2 ZoomCharts visuals in a single page. It doesn't matter what type of visuals they are, as long as that's just 2 of our visuals showcasing the cross-chart capabilities. That is the most important thing. The other thing that I wanted to note is do keep in mind that this, in comparison to other challenges, is a lot shorter. What I mean by this is we started off with registration and submissions starting from December 1st. Today is December 7th. And the deadline for the submissions is, for me, it's 16th of December, 2 a.m., so 2 at night. But in general terms, it's the 15th of December. So you have a little bit over a week still to create your reports. But just keep that in mind, that in comparison to other cases where you had multiple weeks and where we had multiple sessions, we're just going to be having one workshop and the submission deadline is already next week. But don't let it, discourage it. Still create a report, do the best that you can. It doesn't matter if you don't win the challenge, right? And I think those of you who have participated previously and not necessarily won a challenge, it doesn't mean that participating in these challenges and workshops are not, giving you anything new and actually informative that you can use afterwards. So create the best that you can, receive a feedback from us. Oh yeah, don't forget, once you submit a report, what we do is we actually go through those reports and we send you customized feedback. We actually look at your report and we tell you, hey, you could have changed this to that. Pay a little bit more attention to the slicer positioning, the navigation experience, and these sort of things, something that applies to your report, just so you can kind of see the weak points that are currently identified. That's one of them. The other thing is, don't forget that you have the option to book one-on-one sessions. And I'll ask my colleague Sabina to post in the link to the calendar, so you can also use that. So you can schedule a session with me. We can go through some of the key points that you're struggling with, where you just want some information on, or just want to chat about. Feel free to do that. Schedule a session. We're going to go through them, see what we can do about it, and then go on from there. About the challenge itself, well, it's a challenge about the Christmas sales dataset. The dataset you can get right here. I think, yeah, Sabina already posted the link to the challenge, so you can see in the chat. If not, then I'm just going to paste it again in case you joined it a little bit afterwards. So that's the link to the challenge itself. You can register and everything. Don't forget that for every single registrant for the challenge itself, if you're also participating in the ZoomCharts mini challenge and you sign up through our website, you can also get what we call the developer's license. That means you get full access to all of our visuals completely free of charge. So you can use them for the challenges, to create the reports, to showcase the capabilities and everything, and actually experience the full potential of what they can offer to you. All right. So far, so good. Anything I might have missed? Something that somebody wanted to ask about I didn't cover, or anything? I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it, and then I'm going to jump back to the data set. See, I'm getting into the spirit. I even have a cup of coffee that's already Christmas. All right, I guess everyone's good. If you figure out something afterwards, don't worry. Just send a message. I'll look at it and I'll get back to you. All right, let's go straight into it. So the data set itself is going to be a regular Excel file, which is going to have one table. Everything else that you see here is something that I've created just for the intent of playing around with measures or with different visualizations itself. You can, of course, go into the data set and actually split the data set into multiple dimensions. For example, if we go into the table view and look at the data, we can actually see that, for example, we have something like customer ID. Customer, of course, has an age, they have a gender, and these sort of things. So you can create dimensional tables also for customers, for products, for locations, and these sort of things, of course, if it's necessary, right? In this case, since it's completely randomized, what I did is I just kept it as one regular table just for the ease of use, and I did some alterations for specific things that were needed. Now, what I want you to pay attention to is the data format itself. So when you first look at the data set, right, if you scroll a little bit forward, you're going to find a column that's going to have a date and time. You're going to have two columns. You're going to have a date, you're going to have a time. What I did is I combined them. Now, the reason why I did this is because I wanted to have everything in a single column as well, because I wanted to use it at one particular time. But I also split it up into individual columns for each of the components. You could, of course, also do this, and the best practice would be to actually create a separate date table, which has all of these properties. But like I said, not everybody here joining and trying out these challenges is an expert in data modeling, data science, and Power BI itself, right? So you can also just use a regular table, one singular table, to do these things and create them. You can do this through Power Query. A quick Google search is going to give you a lot of information on how to do that. But essentially, I dragged out and extracted each of the components of the time and the date and timestamp. I altered a little bit and created a star rating. So instead of customer satisfaction, where it was just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this column right here, which is interesting, but I just wanted to play around with it, and I converted it into a star rating. I also created some minute groups, some age groups based on the year or the age of the person and so forth, to, again, play around a bit more with the data set. Because one of the things that I want you to always remind you, when you're participating in these challenges, what you get is the original data source. Never we ever specify that this source cannot be altered. Now, what I mean by altered is, of course, don't try to, create a completely new data set with it, but use it and add additional information on top of it to make it more interesting. Sorry. Like what I did in this case is, if you look at the data set, there's going to be a column right here for location. And the values in the location is just city 1 to city 20. Now, if you look from a data perspective, sure, that gives us an insight that there are 20 cities. But if you think about the data type itself, right, it's supposed to be a geographical information. So having city 1 to 20 doesn't really help me to visualize anything. I can, again, create a new category and look at the categories. But when I think of location or a city, the first thing that comes to my mind is a map. So what I actually did here is I did alter the data. So I have actual countries on the data set itself. And the way I did it is pretty simple. What I did is I actually just took 20 random cities in Europe, and created just a regular table. I added a new data source right here, enter data. I modified it in Excel and just pasted in here the results of it. So what I did here is, you can see I have the city names. I have the longitude and latitude for it, so I can pinpoint the position. And then I use the original column name. It doesn't really matter which city is which, because at this point, it's all randomized, right? You can't really argue with me that city 1 is not going to be Helsinki just because city 1 for you is going to be New York, for example. That's completely fine. These things are anonymized, so there's no way to prove which one is which. And this is what allows you to play around with the data set and actually create interesting stories with it. So what I would recommend is either you do a similar thing what I did, just take 20 cities from whatever region you are in. So for example, I took 20 cities from Europe. Alternatively, if we go back to the map itself, you can see that because they were 20 random cities, you can see that they were actually relatively dispersed, right? They're quite distant from each other. And if I zoom into this region, you can see I lose, for example, what I have here. I have Georgia. So Georgia is now completely out of my viewport because I zoomed in so much. We also have something in Greenland, Iceland, my apologies, Iceland. Yeah, I'm not the greatest geographical guy. But what I meant with this is make sure that the locations that you kind of choose are actually relatively close to each other. And that is for one particular purpose. That allows you to see all the locations when you're zooming in and out of the map. You could, of course, limit, for example, the maximum zoom level. So when you are working with a map, the main thing you need to remember is you're gonna need a longitude and latitude. That is if you're using a ZoomCharts map. Then afterwards, you're gonna need some sort of a value, right? Just makes sense that you want to showcase something on top of it. And then you can see you have actually a lot of different other things you could use, but I'd use gender as a category just to see, for example, who are the biggest spenders in each of the regions, just as an idea. And then a few of the things that I would highly recommend whenever you are using a map visual. First of all, when you're developing something with the map visual, the first thing I usually do is the following. I select the visual, open up the formatting options, open up toolbar, and enable zoom number. It's a very small little neat thing that all it does really is adds this number. Now you might think, okay, cool, why do I need that number, right? Why is it so important that that's the first thing that I do? Well, the reason for that is because if we start to look at the settings, for example, for the same base layer, you can see there are settings minimum and maximum zoom, max auto zoom. You go to the shape layer, there's minimum and maximum zoom. You go to the nodes, there's max clustering zoom level. So there's a lot of things that reference the zoom level. And if you don't have the zoom number enabled, which is what we didn't have with the very first version of the map, and the only thing that we could really do, trust me, this was very fun. You always went back to the 0, so you zoomed out as much as possible, and then you went like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this is the 5th level. It's not very intuitive, right? So we added the option to enable the zoom number just so you don't have to do this every single time. So we always have a reference of what level of the zoom are you using, and then you can afterwards use it in your map. For example, if we look here, the map itself, the base layer of the map, is set to autofocus. Now, what autofocus means is it's gonna follow the data. For example, if I start to filter something out, you can see the map repositions itself based on the locations that have the relative data. Now, in this case, they're all kind of relatively close to each other still, so it kind of looks like the map doesn't really change, right? But if I do a small little change, and for example, just let's add here at the bottom, because we're just playing with things and showing things. Let's add no, actually not from data, but from table. I'm going to add the city. There we go. I'm going to add it right here at the bottom. Switch it to a drop down, for example. And yeah, for those of you who haven't played a lot with the slicers, for those of you who have, you might have seen me doing this before, but for those of you who haven't, Slicers have one amazing feature which is very well hidden, and that is the search option. If you look at the formatting options and I type in search, you see it finds nothing. But if you right click on the ellipsis on these three little dots right here, you can click on search, and now whenever I open it up, I'm going to have a search bar. So for example, I want to find Riga. That's the capital of Latvia. That's where I'm actually at right now. You can see as soon as I chose the country, it zooms into that country. So the map always follows where the data goes. Whatever you have available, the map is going to adjust to it, and you're going to have an easy way of understanding what's visible and where is it located. What else I did here? I went ahead and added the world shapes. Now the world shapes add a shape layer for each country in the world. This is a built-in shape layer. But there are some drawbacks to it. I went for it just to have a visual effect. For example, you can see I also added a little bit of conditional formatting on top of it, right? So I can see which regions are, if I zoom in closer, which regions have the highest sales, which one have the lowest, and so forth. But the tricky part about this is, since this adds a shape on top of every single country in the world, if I click on a country that's, highlighted with a value, you can see the data gets filtered out. However, if I click on a country that's not in the data set that I created, for example, in this case, UK, you can see that breaks the whole process. So one thing that I could say to you, for me, I didn't do it on purpose, but for you guys, something to play around with is you could actually create your own custom GeoJSONs. A GeoJSON file is just a file that just allows you to define the shapes, so-called polygons, where you actually highlight a certain country, a certain region, or something like that. That is, of course, if you want to use shape layers. If you don't want to use them, you can disable them and just use a regular map. This way, whenever a user clicks on a country, it doesn't have anything to select, so you're all good there. But if you click on a cluster, that's going to select everything that's within the cluster. So it's one good thing to remember. What else is here? For the map, one of the things that you can actually play around with as well is if you decide that instead of, like what I did is I chose 20 different countries in Europe and I chose the capitals for them. That's where my nodes are located. If you decide that you want to go for one country, so let's say, for example, the same Latvia, so where I'm from right now, and I could have chosen just 20 cities within Latvia. You can do that as well. So from whatever country you're joining from, choose that country, choose 20 cities within the country, and then create a data set around it. You can always adjust it. Like I said, since we just have city 1 to 20, it doesn't identify anything specific. The data set doesn't also say Christmas sales in Europe or North America or whatever. You have the full option of exploring and doing whatever you want. So go crazy with it. That's what I would say. So let's create those. And the reason why I went there is the map visual also has this little lasso tool. You can see right here. And once you activate it, you can actually draw your own shapes on the map. So that allows you to, for example, split a country, let's say, into 2 or 3 segments. And when you have created these segments, you can actually click on them, and that's going to filter out the data. In this case, again, be cautious of what you create. Don't create situations where you don't have any data. Like, for example, if I click here, you can see we get a filter. If I click here where I don't have any cities highlighted, that's going to break the logic of the report. So create, for example, again, the shapes that actually make sense and allow the user to filter out something that's informative and actually gives you any insight within the report. So that's for the map visual. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I'll take a look at them. What else we did here? We just played around with different combinations of visuals so you can see how it works together. What else we did here is, for example, we used the network visual. And the setup for it is pretty simple. We used 2 different categories. In this case, we went with the payment type and the category of the product, and we measured them based on the sales. The visual itself works the same way as any other ZoomCharts visual. As soon as you click on a node, that passes out a filter. If I, for example, decide to choose something again here, you can see that filters out even further on. So you can decide on how you tell the story with it. I could use the network chart as one of the driving forces, or if I, for example, create a duplicate of the page, right? And then this is the story that I want to tell. For example, let's say the network is going to be here. Let's position it somewhere around here. There we go. The map is going to be here. Now the drivers for this are going to be the donut chart, the combo chart. Probably not the best layout, but it's fine, right, guys? You're going to forgive me. I hope so. Really hope so. Otherwise, I'm not going to hear the end of it. So I'm going to add in the hierarchy only the year. We actually have a year column, so I'm just going to use that. In the date axis, I'm going to use the regular date field. And on the series, which is the value, I'm going to be using, let's say, quantity. So this shows me the quantity of sold products across the timeline. And I can start to play around with the visuals one by one. And I want to say, okay, I actually want to focus on the Christmas market. We can see in the data set that there's actually 46% of the entries that weren't part of a promotion. So here is one of the things that I wouldn't recommend to keep empty. You can see here, because I did a lot of things on purpose just so we can cover them. You can see that 46.3% is nothing. That is because in the data set, there's no value for it. So what I would have done in a real world scenario is I would have gone back to the Power Query and adjusted so that blank values would say, for example, not part of a promotion. Do not leave these cases where you just have blank values, because it's not helping anybody, right? Even if you look at it, you could have situations where it's just the lack of proper data control, whether somebody inputted an invalid value. There's a lot of reasons why that could have happened. So it's a lot easier for you to categorize them so that whenever something new happens, you can identify it. So we went with the Christmas market, and these are different shipping methods. So if I choose Express, we can see that sales were the highest amount of Express products were in 2023. I highlight that filters out the payment methods, an online payment. I want to focus on adults. This is what I see. So for Christmas market, Express product delivery, year 2023, categories were online payments, adult age group. We can see the split of the product. So in total, we actually sold a $506.63. This is the split of them. And this is how they were split up geographically. And this is how you create your stories. You're just basically trying to allow the visuals to navigate the user through them and continue to tell a story. What I usually do when I try to create a story is think about an actual scenario where you would like to explain it. The first thing that a lot of people do is, for example, have the map as the largest visual. Even though it is the largest, I set it up at the very end. The reason for that is because I want this visual to be something that helps me finish off the story, not start it. Because everything else here allows me to narrow down the results, and then I can look at the specific entries. You see where I'm going with this, right? So you create these, that allows you to navigate it and allows you to go from one side to the other. So this is one of the options. Now, if we go to this page, what I did here is, again, I kept the map without the shape layer, for example, in this case, and I went with the average customer satisfaction. That is another angle that you can try to investigate. I just wanted to see, okay, how does it actually go into the whole market? And I can see, even though the highest amount of ratings is a 1-star, yeah, right? We're still getting the most money from them. So getting a 1-star doesn't always mean that it's bad for business. It doesn't always mean, right? We do get a lot of Karens sometimes. There's nothing you can do about it. But I can afterwards go and say, okay, I want to investigate the male category a little bit further. We can see, okay, so still 1-star ratings is the highest prominent one. Okay, what happens in the electronics market? There we go. Electronics are actually with a pretty good review score. You can actually go and check every single one of them, what's happening in clothing. In clothing, it's a very narrow split, I would say, you have between the 5 stars and the 1 stars. But hey, that's what the data is telling you. That's the story that it's presenting to you. This is why you play around with it and see, okay, what else can I do with it? And then, of course, once you filter out here, you can focus on a specific metric and you can see it on the map again. Again, you're trying to tell the story and you're trying to go through it and explain, okay, what else can I see here which wasn't really visible before? So we went through that. What else? Let's go to this page. On this page, what I did is I added a couple of KPIs and I'm using the new card visual. The reason for doing that is because it just allows you to do it a lot quicker than manually creating each one of them and individually customizing them. Then I created a quick overview for, again, the customer satisfaction at the top. And then I created multiple visuals to go in a different way. So in this case, I actually wanted to focus a little bit more on the time. And what this visual does, it allows me to select a particular year. So for example, if I select 2021, you can see that filters out the data. And I can see, so in 2021, this is the particular time of purchase. So we can see it's actually all around the place. We do have some high points and some low points, but overall it's relatively close to each other. Now, if I choose, for example, I usually shop at something like 7 o'clock after work. I'm drilling down into minute segments. So till 15 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour. And I say, okay, I actually want to investigate the 15 minutes. And you can see I also adjust the x-axis format. So now I can see starting from 9:15 to 7:29. So play around with the visuals and see what you can do with it. The reason why I went with 2 colors, this is one of the things that got me, I'd say caught me off guard a little bit at first, is because if we go back to the data set and we look at the individual components, we have a month. And you can see we actually have only 2 months of sales. And this is something for you to keep in mind. The reason for this is because, for example, if you choose something like even a native, for example, stacked column chart, and I'm going to say, okay, I want the full hierarchy, and I want to go by under measures, total sales. Okay, we have the years. I expand them down to quarters. I expand them down to months. I expand them down to days. And this is the tricky part. You can see right now it's a categorical axis, right? So we see the year, we see the quarter, and we see the months. If I go on and actually convert this instead of a hierarchy into a regular date field, this is the view that I get. So you're getting a lot of this blank area. Even though the view is correct, right? We do have around 60 days per each year when we have these sales. Showcasing something like this, I think most of you will agree with me, it doesn't really tell you a lot on, the storytelling part. Just looks like a few little towers up here and there. So think about how you visualize these things. So what I did is I figured out that from the hierarchy perspective, the furthest we could go is month. Because going into days, that just creates too small split for everything. And it's also hard to follow. Because here you're going on 2018, 2019, and it's always fourth quarter and only 2 months. But for the user, if he doesn't notice this, he might feel that this is starting from January and going till the end of the year, right? So there's a lot of things he has to capture before he can read the full story. So what I did is I went with just sticking to the year, and I created two separate measures, one for the month of November and one for the month of December. The reason why I also did this is, one, I can use these two values as individual series in the timeline visual. The other one, I also wanted to use them as cards. So I want to showcase to the users, whoever starts to investigate it, what is the total sales and how does it split between the two of them. Then I went with the quantity and so forth, but I could also focus just on the sales, for example, and I could have gone with also the difference. What is the number difference between the 2 months? What is the number difference between this year and the previous year? What is the running total, for example? So there's a lot of different variations you can go from here. And if a user, for example, decides to go for, I don't know, a gender of, let's say, female, young adult, age 25, you can see total amount spent across these 5-6 years, 12K, 6.5 in December, 5.5 in November. Again, allow the visuals to tell the story, allow them to kind of drive the narrative on how you're explaining things. As far as how to build something like this is quite simple. So let's create, for example, a timeline visual. Well, it's quite simple for me, right? Because I've done a couple of hundreds of reports, but trust me, you'll get there. Not with hundreds of reports, not that bad. It's just what I do every single day. So on the date hierarchy, I'm going to add the date and time to keep it simple, but I'm going to remove everything except the year, right? I'm going to stick to the yearly display unit. On the date value x-axis, I'm going to add date again. Now, the reason why you're adding date 2 times is because in the first one, you specifically define the hierarchy. So those are going to be your display units, years, quarters, months, weeks, and so forth. On the second field, you define the actual date itself, and that allows the visual to connect the date to the unit. So it fully understands the matrix layout of the data. Once you have that, the next one I'm going to be adding is going to be sales for December and sales for November. You can switch them around, of course, if you want to. That's not the main point here. Actually, we could switch them up just so it kind of goes in a chronological order. So November, December. There we go. You can see this is what you're going to get by default. Now, if you think about it, having them side by side is one option. The other option that we could do is open up formatting options, open up series defaults, enable this, and switch it to stacked. That's going to create a nice stacked column chart. All right, looks good. Now, what else we could do? We have these two. We have the categories and everything. All right. Now, since we used measures, one of the things that I would also recommend you to look into when you're creating these visuals is in the series defaults, and also in all individual series as well, actually, you're going to have this toggle right here called multi-select aggregation. Once you enable it, it's going to allow you to choose what kind of value do you want to showcase based on the measure that you have provided. So for example, if I highlight 2 years, you can see in the tooltip it shows you, so it's 2020 to 2021, and it's showcasing you the sum of it. Now, if I also want to say, okay, I actually want to see what's also the average. I didn't create a single measure on top of it, but the tooltip now showcases me the average sales for this year and the average for that year. If you would want it to be, for example, on, I don't know, monthly basis, then you would just adjust another measure specifically tailored for that case. In this case, it's basically going for the specific value. Or you could go for something like, instead of an average, want to go for, let's say, maximum. What was the max sales for this year or this year? That sort of stuff. which is really good because it basically allows you to play around with how you're showcasing the values. Because if you're going on only a single year, you can see it's just the two of these. Once I select one of them, it's still just the two of these. It only appears and takes into account when you have multiple values. So in this selection, you can see, okay, the highest sales that I ever had was 141K. And in November, it was 136K. So this sort of stuff. What else? You decide that I actually want to see also the quantity. We could add it to the visual, but you can also just simply add it to the tooltip content. I also add it here. And again, if I hover over a single column, you can see it references one. If I highlight multiple of them, it allows me to see every single one of them if I have it properly selected. So under tooltip settings, we can of course also enable this one, but it's not that important. So the tooltip content showcases the first value. Okay, I got it while it's showing. I messed up the measure there. It happens, right? It's a live session. If everything would have gone according to the plan, it wouldn't be a live session. So add the tooltip, for example, as well. And if we go back to this page, what else we had here? We had the values. Okay. Let's go here. Series defaults. Enable the value labels. Go down. And one of the things that I'm gonna change is right here. So one thing that's happening on the chart by default with the value labels. Take a closer look at the tooltip and the values that you see on the chart. You can see that the sales in November was 140K. If you look at the sales in December, in the tooltip, it says 145K, but on the visual, it says 286K. I'm actually going to change the color of the font so it's a little bit easier for you guys to see. So you can see this one says 286K. Now, why is that? It's because what we do by default is we allow you to create these cumulative totals. So it's always going to be summing up the values regardless of how many subsets you have. So for example, it's going to be series 1 plus series 2 plus series 3 plus series 4 and so forth. So it's going basically as a running total within the column itself. Now, if that's not the approach you want to have and you physically want to showcase just the individual value of the series, you go under the value labels and you change the use total stack value to false. You can see now we still have 140K, but we now have, instead of 286K, we have 145K. So you have something that allows you to play around with these and adjust them. Then of course we can choose and say inside the base, you can play around with the font colors and everything. In this case, I would probably go with something like this to kind of emphasize on the value itself to highlight it. Might not be the best choice, but hey, as long as you guys get the point, it's fine by me. So we went with this. Now, the last one, the total value. You can see we don't have another toggle that just simply allows you to add a total on top of it. But there is always a workaround for everything, right? In our case, what we would do is you take the total sales as, for example, a separate measure. It's still getting stacked, right? So now you're going to be saying, yeah, well, that's not really what we're after for. I just want to have the value from this. All right. We go into the formatting options. Then we scroll down and find Series 3 configuration. Why Series 3? Because that was total sales is Series 3. See? So Series 3 configuration. And I say, I want to customize this series individually. So it's splitting now apart from the series defaults configuration. And I'm going to be saying, hey, I want this one to be a line. So you can already see the chart adjusting to the values. And then I'm going to say, now how do I hide it even more? Pretty simple. Either you change the line width to a 0, or you make the line completely transparent. That's one way to do it. Now, once you have done it, you simply also make sure you have the value labels enabled. And you say that it's going to be outside top, because that is the location of the data value. And you can see now I have the totals plus the 2 individual values. For those of you who are new to Power BI, it might seem weird that we need to use workarounds. For those of you who have played around with Power BI more, you know what I'm talking about. Power BI does have a lot of workarounds that help you to get to a workaround. There's a lot of things that people have figured out which are not possible yet with the native tools. So there's going to be a workaround that somebody has created in one shape or form, regardless. But yeah, after that, all I did is just adjust the colors. And that is the same visual that we have right here. And like I said, the reason why I did this is because we only have sales in 2 months. And having them side by side to the full list, doesn't really make a lot of sense. You could, of course, also go with something like this and just create a unique column. So we do have, if you remember, we have a date column and we do have months, years. So we could create a concatenated version of the value, for example. Or you could do something like this. You could go for a new column. Okay, refresh now so you can leave me alone. Thank you. New column. It's still going to be there. All right, sit there. Sit tight. So I'm going to call it year month, and I'm going to go with a format function. I'm going to reference the date and time. I'm going to say that I want to create a new format. I want to have the full year plus the shortened version of the month divided by just a dash. Let's say you don't want to have a timeline, but you want to have a combo chart, right? Well, I'm just creating a combo, finding my year month, using that as a category, and using total sales as series. That is another option. Of course, the only thing I would definitely do is, if you have timelines, never sort them based on the value. Always make sure that you're physically sorting them in the right way. So in this case, I can go for date and time, but it's not going to allow me because there's going to be multiple. Okay. Yeah, well, then I would create another column, which would have a concatenated version of the year plus month. That would give me a unique index number, which I could use for sorting. Oh well, you can see at least the struggles are real for everybody, right? But I could go for something like this at least. So it's in a hierarchical order. Just play around with these things. There's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of things you can kind of add on top of it. Like, for example, one of the things that I mentioned was the location, right? You can easily look at the data set and say, hey, I could actually also add this dimension on top of it. Go ahead. There's no rules against it. The one thing that I did in this case as well is, whilst building the report, we do have this dictionary. If I'm not familiar with the data, right, it's not my data source. I didn't create it. I'm just using it. So what I did from the original file is I took the definitions table, I kept it, and I created it as a table in a separate page. That way, whenever I, for example, look at the columns and think like, what was category, right? Because category itself is not very descriptive. I can go back to the data dictionary and take a look and find, okay, category. So category of the product, for example. Okay, so that's category. I could rename it, but then just make sure you rename it in every single location so you don't get confused afterwards. If you have these definitions for the columns, and if you're a developer, keep them in the report whilst you're developing. You can hide them so it doesn't bother anybody else. Make it as the last page, for example, so that people, don't get to it unless they really want to get to it. But for you as a developer, it's a quick way to understand and get back to the source and say, okay, what was the column all about? What does it represent? Ideally, I would have not only a description, I would have a sample value. So that should be going and working there. All right, I'm going to quickly take a look at the Q&A, and then I'm going to continue on based on how much time we're going to have. So we do have a question from Jonathan. The dataset has a column named Christmas sales and trends. What is the difference between that column and the quantity column? Isn't the transaction ID an indication of a single sales? I hope that makes sense. So let me see. So we have transaction ID, Christmas sales and trends. Do we have a column named Christmas sales and trends? Hey, Jonathan, can you verify for me? Are you looking for the difference between the transaction ID and quantity, or a column named Christmas sales and trends and quantity? Just so I know that I answered the right thing. Mahmoud, I worked on the bad rates like 1 and 2 customer satisfaction. I found that all the 5 rates have nuances. Well, yeah, it's a randomized data set. A lot of things can happen there. So a comment from Bimmel. I logged in through ZoomCharts credentials, but unable to see the ZoomCharts visuals. I do have them till yesterday. Do I need to get those manually? All right, so just to get the process straight, you have a report that you developed. You logged into Power BI Desktop with the ZoomCharts credentials, but you're not seeing the visuals. The question is, Bimmel, for you, did you log in with these credentials right here? Let me open up Edge. So did you use these credentials that allow you to log into ZoomCharts, or did you use these credentials that you get as a part of the challenge? So for example, if I go back to the challenge, and if I sign up for the developer's license, see my license, or did you use these ones? Because if you logged with these ones, you should have seen the visuals. If you don't see them, then write to, Sabina already messaged you. So write into webinars@zoomcharts.com and we'll see what's going on there. You use these ones, but you don't see the visuals. Okay, so message us so we can find the actual account that you were using and understand maybe it has revoked licenses for whatever reason, just so we can check things. All right. Istiaba, I hope I didn't butcher your name. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Did I come in late? Yeah, like 50 minutes late, but you're good. I notice you have a map here. We do have a map, yeah. There we go. We have it here, and also another version of it right here. So to create a map, but the data set has the city number, not the name of the city or the region. Could you possibly help me this particular data set? Thank you. Sure. So what I did with the cities itself is you're going to see it in the recording afterwards as well. But what I did is I just basically found 20 random cities in Europe, found their longitude and latitude for the capital cities, and I used it as a reference to the original table. This is primarily to make the report a lot nicer and not just talk about 20 random cities, well, city 1 to 20, but actual cities that could be used as a reference point. So Bimo mentioned return flag and discount amount seems like the drivers to know the actual sales. Please share your thoughts. So yeah, sure. The thing you have to keep in mind is that, for example, the sales that were finally returned are not going into your total sales actually fully, let's say that went from point A to point B, right? Return sales is something that got canceled in point A to B. So that has to be deducted. The same as the discount. The discount, I have to double check from the definitions file if the discount has been already subtracted. So let's see. So we have total price. Total price for the product calculated as quantity times unit price. So discount has not been deducted. So in theory, discount should be deducted from total price to get the actual number. The dataset has this column, Christmas sales and trends. All right. Let's see. Christmas sales and trends. All right, that's the file. Okay, that's the definition file. Are you sure, Jonathan? Because I can't find it. 18 to 17. That is age. From 18 to 70. Based on the values itself, I would say that that is the age column. It might have been an error in the import of the data, but that seems a lot like the age column. Let's see. Age. 18 to 70. Yeah, that's the age column. Because I'm looking at the same file right here that I also opened up in the Excel. That's the original data set. And there's no column named Christmas trends and sales. It's just the age. It seems like it could have been an issue with the import or transformation of the data that accidentally replaced the values for whatever reason, but it might have misplaced the values. But glad we got that figured out because I was getting confused because I don't remember a column like that. So what else? Can we change the city number to the city name on Excel? Or no, you can of course change it in the Excel file. Nobody's going to judge you on the fact that you made the adjustments in Power BI. You can change the Excel file, alter these corrections either with just a regular replace values, or you can use something like a lookup function to replace the values. It's completely up to you. So Jalen, whatever floats your boat, whichever one is easier, do that. That's going to be completely fine. All right, I think we're actually starting to run on a little bit low on time, but I'm just going to bring this comment in front of you all again, right? I did tell you about it. So the infamous feedback form, right? We all have seen them. We all love them. We all hate them at the same time. But for this one, I beg it, and please, from the bottom of my heart, please fill in the feedback forms so we understand how did you like the session, what did you like about it, dislike about it, what else do you want to see, what else do you want to hear from us, what type of sessions do you want to see more, and so forth, because that's basically going to determine what type of sessions you're going to have in the future. The more feedback we get, the more quality we're going to give back to you. The less feedback you get, the more boring sessions are going to become eventually, since we're going to be doing the same thing thinking that this is exactly what you guys want, right? So if there's anything you want to say, use the feedback forms to tell us. If you dislike me and don't want to see me ever again, tell us that as well. We'll find somebody else. If you love me and see one more of me, tell that as well. I always like to be praised. Does delivery time mean days it takes to deliver or time? So delivery time, if you look at the definition, number of days taken for delivery if the shopping has been done online. This is the reason why, Sangamitra, I said keep the definition file next to you. All the definitions are right here. Thank you, guys. Hey, you never know, right? If I don't hear from you guys, if I don't see the feedback forms, for me, it's like we did another session. I hope that everybody was having fun, but since we're not in a call where everybody can just jump in and tell me something, it feels sometimes lonely. That's why I have in other sessions somebody else to chat with, because I like to have a discussion. The data dictionary is in the original file, Excel file. It's the first sheet that you have here. It has all the names of it and all the definitions. But one thing that I forgot to tell you is the file that I just created with all these different variations and alterations and all the measures that I've done and everything is, again, something that we're going to be providing to you. So after the session, I think together with the recording, correct, Sabina? We're going to send it out to you guys so you can use this as a reference material. But one thing that I'm begging from you guys, right, please, is don't just copy paste. Add a little bit of a twist on top of it. Play around with the visuals, see what you can do with it, change the categories, change the layouts, go crazy with it. But don't send me back the same thing that I've sent to you. We did get a couple of reports last time that are basically that, and it's not fun. Yep, there we go. So the sample file will be sent to you with the recording. So you're going to have the same file, all the measures, all the transformations that I did. So you're going to have the same 20 random cities as well. If you want to change the 20 random cities, you can easily do that in the Power Query. You can open it up, go to the table. Remember, the source is just a manual table. So if you click on source, you can physically change all the values here. So like I said, go crazy with it. Marist, how do I add ZoomCharts visuals to Power BI? There are a few ways. If you don't have a license, the easiest way would be go to the challenge page itself on ZoomCharts and register, and then activate your so-called developer's license. The developer's license is going to give you a login and a password. And afterwards, you have to use this login and password within Power BI to log in. Once you log in, the visuals are going to be populated for you automatically because we're going to be adding them from our organizational store. And you're going to have all the licenses to use them to try out the features and everything. If you do have a license, for example, if your company is using already ZoomCharts or you just happen to have a license, then you can just add them through the app source. All right. Will not take any more of your time, guys. Thank you so much for attention and joining today. I hope it was insightful and you actually managed to learn something new and useful. Like I've always said, learning something new is simple. I could say a random fact. Was it useful? Maybe not. But the main thing is you learned something new and that was actually useful. If that happened, I did my part. Now it's time for you guys to do your part. So I'm looking forward to seeing all your submissions. And remember, if you do have any questions, just drop us a message at webinars@zoomcharts.com. And I'll see you in the next workshop, seminar, webinar, whatever it's going to be, right? I'm going to be here for a while, hopefully. All right, guys. Have a great, amazing day and happy holidays. If we don't see each other before the Christmas, happy holidays, happy New Year, and best of luck to you. All right. Bye, everyone.